Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steve Warneke Show on 850 WFTL. We are here Saturday mornings at 10. So we're going to do something very different today. I wanted to talk to you about an announcement we have, and it's that we have 4 more weeks of the Steve Warneke Show. I envisioned this consumer advocacy show when I was a young kid listening to a guy that did something similar in Denver, and it's always been a dream of mine. We're going to have to put the pause button on it because, believe it or not, a pandemic is not the best time to be trying to do a consumer advocacy show. Most places are closed. There's not a lot of consumering going on right now. I just made that word up. And despite the fact that we augmented the show, I mean, we basically got on the air. We did a couple weeks. Everything was going great. We had people lined up. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit and everything shut down. And we didn't want to stop doing the show. So what we ended up doing was kind of augmenting what I had envisioned. And instead of taking tons of consumer complaints, we gave consumers resources to get through COVID. And there was all kinds of cool stuff, tips on buying a car, accounting, unemployment, saving money at the grocery store. And in the meantime, we had amazing interviews. And we had the crazy coupon ladies. We had the mayor on of Fort Lauderdale. We had a lot of cool guests. And then also we managed to recover thousands of dollars for the consumers that did call in. So I'm very proud of the work. It's outstanding job by not only me, but the entire team. I mean, Captain Kelly was there every step of the way, helping me with the website and booking the guests and being part of the show and investigating problems. And Sharina, who is one of the best producers that I've ever met, it was really, and it worked. And I'm proud of the body of work. So if you want to listen to it, the information there is good. And it will be for some time. It's at stevewarneke.com. It's Warneke. We're going to keep that information up on the website. Now, I have 4 weeks of the Steve Warneke Show left, and we could have continued with the consumer-oriented show. But considering what is happening with the George Floyd case, considering what is happening across the country, and then knowing what I know about my background, right? That I am a retired police officer of 15 years. I retired as a sergeant from Denver Police honorably after 15 years of service. I went on to write a book. It's a memoir about my time on the job. It's called From Boy to Blue. That memoir was meant to heal the relationship between police and citizens. It wasn't just to tell war stories. It wasn't to glorify myself. I left the police department with a purpose. And I wanted to share what I had learned. And it was a unique perspective, and it still is. I went on to talk about cumulative trauma in police departments, or what I call law enforcement distress syndrome. And I wrote about it. And I conducted a research study with thousands of police officers. And the results were astounding. And I've traveled around speaking to police departments about cumulative trauma. I've been utilized by the media. I've been a media expert when it comes to police issues. And so to ignore what's happening right now, I think does a disservice to America. I think I have something to add here that's not going to just echo the cacophony of screaming and yelling at each other or all of the bumper sticker talking points that we're used to hearing. And I think what I have to say is really, really important, not only for police work, but for the fabric of the country. So, in this last 4 weeks, I would like to introduce to you a 4-part series on policing in America. Part 1, which is today, the broad brush. We're going to talk about the George Floyd case. And I want to give you a global perspective on policing in America. All right. Part 2 will be next week. We're going to talk about the face of America's police officers. Who are our cops? In part 3, I want to look at the system of policing. I want to look at the complexity of it. I want to look at the rules and regulations, the systems of oversight, the layers of accountability. Because as members of Congress are talking about legislating new police reform, which may or may not be a bad idea depending on what they propose, there has to be an understanding of the complexities of the job. We'll talk about that. And then part 4 will be about cumulative trauma, PTSD, what I'm calling law enforcement distress syndrome, and how the job of police officer really creates a divide between cops and citizens. Okay, having said that, we're going to get started with the broad brush. So my name is Steve Warneke. I told you, I'm a retired police sergeant from the Denver Police Department. I worked on the street most of my career. I worked in various different assignments. I was a financial crimes detective for almost 2 years, and then I was promoted to sergeant. I spent a little time in internal affairs. I went to the hostage negotiation school, and the last assignment I had before I honorably retired from the police department was to go to the Media Relations Bureau. And I did the press conferences, and when a big thing would happen, I would go out and do the interviews, and that's what I did, okay? But more importantly, the Denver Police Department, who's a pioneer in law enforcement, I believe, decides that they want to take a little bit of control over the narrative about law enforcement and not just leave it to the media. So the Denver Police Department, through social media, starts putting out information, starts putting out stories, starts sharing who we are as a police department through social media and talking about the good work that police officers do every day. And that's what I was part of, to start that. And it was such an honor. So our work went on to win several awards. And not just me, but the team. I have 2 regional Emmys, 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, as does the team that worked with me. And we did it together. And it was really important. So that was my time on the department. Now, I wanted to do other things. I'm crazy. For some reason, I wanted to live in South Florida where it's warm all the time. So I honorably retired after my father died. And I wanted to pursue my dreams. So I moved to South Florida, but I wasn't done being a police officer, so I didn't join another department, but I published my book, From Boy to Blue. Okay. From Boy to Blue started as a journal, right? I was writing a journal about my stories because all the old timer cops were like, hey, you got to write a journal if you could sell this stuff later on. And I just thought, what a cool idea. I was kind of into journaling anyway. So I would come home and I would journal about what happened. And it really proved to be valuable later because when I went to write this book and decided to write this book, over 15 years, you remember things, but you don't remember with the detail that you had when you were there. And so a lot of the things I wrote about the sights and sounds and smells and the exact words that I remembered. And so I was able to have this sort of account of what I had been through, but I didn't want to just say, look what I went through. There was a purpose to it. So I published the book, From Boy to Blue. And then, as I mentioned, I went on to work with LEDS, PTSD, cumulative trauma, and do the research study. So, but why is it I'm doing what I'm doing? Why publish the book? Why worry about cumulative trauma? You're out of the police department, right? Just go do something else. Go lay on the beach. Go find another job. What are you doing? You're not a cop anymore. I feel so strongly about the job of police officer, not because I did it. I'm not looking for any recognition that I did it. You don't need to thank me. But I discovered while being a cop that the job of police officer is integral to America's way of life. Without police officers, we just have laws written in books. Without faces to make those laws come alive, society would descend into anarchy and chaos instantaneously. Now, I have been saying that since well before the George Floyd case, and you can see instances all the time when riots and looting after Katrina and the Super Bowls on, we're this close. The only reason that we can go outside and mull around the lawn, say hi to our neighbors, and go to the grocery store and not have to have bulletproof vests and guns and be doing martial law and trying to, protect our family and our goods by using force on our own is because the police are there to do it. And yet there's this incredible disdain building for the people, the faces that are representing the laws that we have agreed through our legislature by electing them and voting for, by the laws we agreed to abide by. So it's more important, and if you don't think we are on the border of anarchy and chaos, just look at what happened after the George Floyd case. You're listening to the Steve Warneke Show on 850 WFTL, and this is a 4-part series on policing in America. It's at stevewarneke.com. You're listening to Episode 1, The Broad Brush. I want to start before we get into the George Floyd case, and I want to talk to you about the climate of the media. It's important. It's relevant. That's where we're getting our information. That's who's telling us what the hell's going on. So in order to appreciate the broad view, and listen, when I say broad view, the global view, I want you to imagine that we're back in Roman times, and there's the Colosseum, and the gladiators are fighting down on the floor. I want everybody to take a step back, and just be above it all, right? So if you were the gladiator and you're involved in the fight and you're down fighting, you don't see everything. But if you're up in the stands, you get a much different perspective. You can hear more, see more. You can see what's coming, the fans, the sounds, the sights, the smells. You're not focused on the fight. And in order for us to solve this together as a country, we have to start taking a half step back and trying to put ourselves in the stand of the Colosseum and give ourselves this global view. All right, so let's look at the media. Here's one thing I don't understand about what's happening with the media. Why are people drawn toward extremism in the media? If you look at, Fox's #1 show, Sean Hannity, or Wolf Blitzer, Laura Ingraham, Rachel Maddow, Chris Como, it's not like Walter Cronkite or something, where it was like, this is one side, this is the other side. It seems to be, to me, that the people that are the most outspoken get attention because they say outrageous things, right? The more outrageous stuff you say, the more attention you get. And perhaps that's why, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But I happen to believe, and that's for both sides, by the way. I'm not picking on the right, not picking on the left. I'm not doing that. I really believe in my heart that there is a huge section of America that has a gigantic appetite for moderation, which we're not getting. I'm going to call it we want Walter Cronkite back, So, and I saw an interesting article this week. ABC World News Tonight with David Muir has been dominating the ratings. An average audience of 10.5 million people per night. And it's one of the most watched shows every week. Now, obviously, there's a lot of dispute about ABC, CBS, NBC, and the mainstream media being leftist and all of that kind of thing. I definitely don't think ABC, CBS, and NBC, the major networks, are impartial. However, they're closer than MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and the more extreme cable networks. So doesn't that tell you that perhaps America is interested in moderation? Maybe the masses of the country are not as extreme as it appears to be if you just read a paper or watch television for any period of time here in America. Maybe we do have an appetite for objective, real, both sides of the story reporting. You know, I used to watch Matlock with Andy Griffith when I was a kid, right? And my favorite thing about that show was you would hear, and this happened for LA Law too, it was a bunch of shows, but if you ever watch those old courtroom dramas, almost every time they'd get a witness on the stand and the prosecutor would get up and they would examine them, and you'd get done, you'd be like, well, they're guilty. You know, they did it. Yeah, you're done, right? And then Matlock or whomever, the defense attorney, whatever show you're watching, would get up and they would ask a bunch of questions. And when it was over, you'd go, well, maybe they didn't do it. I don't know what's going on here. So that's kind of what I want and expect from the media. It's like, here's what this side's saying. Here's what that side is saying. You know, it's like we report, you decide, but actually for real this time. Not like we report, you decide, but we're not really reporting. We're just telling you what we think. Like an actual report, you decide. All right, since we're talking global perspective, we want to know the climate of the world. What is the climate of the world right now? It's tense, lots of tension, right? There's lots of defriending happening. Don't talk to me. If you're a Trump supporter, you're not my friend. If you like Obama, don't ever talk to me again. I don't want to hear it. We can't be friends if you're pro-life. We can't be friends if you're pro-choice. We can't be friends if you like guns. We can't be friends if you don't like guns. My God. Oh, my Lord. Do you know, if somebody came up to me and said, I'm voting for Trump and I'm a Biden supporter, I go, okay. And if I was a Trump supporter and somebody came up to me and said, I'm voting for Biden, I go, okay. Do they want to talk politics? Maybe. If they want to talk, or they want to just yell at me and convince me, or do they want to have a talk? I'm happy to talk about it, but you're entitled to your opinion. I think we've stopped letting people be entitled to their opinion. You'll think what I think, or you can go pound sand. We're angry. We're closed off. We're harsh and trying to silence other people who disagree with us. If you are a Trump supporter, then you go out and you find like the dumbest people and then they put that on TV. Or if you're a Biden supporter, they go out and find the dumbest people and put them on TV. The people that hate Biden make him look like a bumbling moron. People that hate Trump like attack him. It's just like the world is angry. I'm tired of it. I am tired of it. It's not getting us anywhere. It's deteriorating the quality of life, and it's deteriorating the greatest nation on earth. We have got to find a way to come together. So here's and we can't even talk about stuff. We're silenced. You're a racist. Quiet. Or you're this race or that race, so we don't care what you think. You don't know anything. Or you have privilege, so you don't get to speak about anything. Your opinion doesn't matter. Play-by-play announcer for the Sacramento Kings, Grant Napier, was fired from his radio show, resigned from his job after he tweeted, "All lives matter, every single one." The statement apparently was deemed offensive and viewed as mocking the Black Lives Matter movement, caused an uproar. He was fired. He had to resign from calling play-by-play, fired from the radio station. I mean, don't all lives matter? Every single one? Is that mocking Black Lives Matter? Could we all agree that everybody's life is precious? Is that really such an outrageous statement? Are you kidding me right now? Speech about race relations in America doesn't even seem to be valid if you're a certain person. The white male, you can't do that. You gotta. I mean, how are we going to solve these problems? How are we going to come up with solutions? How are we going to work together, unify, and figure out a solution if we can't even have a discussion? How do we begin to heal? Well, here, let's treat each other with respect. Let's listen. Do you know what active listening is? It's not formulating a rebuttal. It's not going, I can't even listen to this. I can't even take this. I don't even. It's not interrupting. Have you ever really listened to somebody word by word? You ever closed your eyes and let the words come in and heard every single word one by one? You ever done that? It's a real challenge and it's a real skill. I'm good at that. It's a hard thing to do. But we can do it. We can also allow people to have their own viewpoints. When someone has a different opinion than us, we don't have to degrade them, call them names, and attempt to win them over. Maybe we're just making ourselves feel better. So let's lay some ground rules for this discussion. If you want to listen to this 4-part series, can you try? Can we just try? Can you try to be open? I can't be open because this is a one-way discussion, but I'll be open later. But can you try to be open? Can you try to listen for real? Without arguing in your mind, without rebutting, without thinking about the grocery list. Can you listen every word? I want you to know more information from an insider perspective so you can decide a little bit better. I want you to hear a different perspective. Are we not allowed anymore as Americans to have a discussion? Guys, we can't accomplish anything if we can't talk about it. So let's talk about the George Floyd case. It was wrong. It was wrong. Almost 9 minutes, this cop is kneeling on the neck of a suspect. As a police supervisor, I would never have allowed that if I saw it. Get off of him, turn him on his side, get him in a police car, get him off the road. It's not good policy in general to just keep people face down in the street for 10 minutes. Get him up. Get him in a car. You know? Put him in a car. Don't kneel on somebody's neck. I mean, you have people around watching. It looks bad. Even if George Floyd lived, even if George Floyd was uninjured, unbruised, he lived, and even if you asked him while he was down there with a knee in his neck, does that hurt? And he goes, nah, it doesn't hurt. Get off his neck. That's not how we treat people, right? But he was hurting. So, law enforcement, just like every other industry, and us as a nation, we continue to learn with every incident, right? Every time something bad happens in America, in any industry, we look at it, the mortgage crash, regulations so that doesn't happen again, right? An airplane crash, we pull the black box, we investigate. What can we do to make it never happen again? Doctors, medical malpractice, medicines, hurt people, people die when they shouldn't have in the care of medical professionals. What happened? How do we make it not happen again? Right? That's what we do. So no system is perfect. So what we're looking for in the George Floyd case is justice and reform. Those are the two things we need to look at. Let's start with justice. This was wrong, right? I mean, it was wrong. So what does justice look like in this case? Do we put the cops on death row and kill them? Is that an eye for an eye? Do we lock them up for life? Throw away the key? Is that the solution? I don't know. Maybe they go to jail for life. I don't know. Let's decide that. The justice system moves slowly, and the reason it moves slowly is for good reason, because it's taking away one of the most important things we're given as Americans, our liberties, our freedom, and puts us in a jail cell and takes away our ability to be at home and go to the grocery store and go to dinner. So it should be a slow-moving, careful, meticulous, checks and balances system. And when you look at the law, they come up with a law, and then there's 50 million case laws about it because every instance is so unique. You can't just write a law because there's, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, there's aggravating, there's mitigating, there's aggravating. It's all, okay. You have to look at a totality of the circumstances when you're imposing the punishment for a crime because it matters. So the justice system seeks to determine intent. Premeditation. You've heard that. Premeditated murder, right? Premeditated murder. A mass shooter buys guns, buys ammo, gets the schematics to a school, plans a day when everybody's there, rents a car, makes plans, goes there, shoots people, premeditated. That's the worst one. But there's also like second-degree murder, which most commonly people think of as like the heat of passion clause. You come home, your spouse is in bed with somebody else, you get mad and shoot them both. You weren't driving home going, I'm going to kill my spouse when I get home, but you got home and you killed him. Still murder. But the premeditation makes it worse, and the justice system differentiates between those different culpabilities. Okay? You have other things in the laws, like known or should have known. You know, when you come home and find your spouse in bed with somebody, you know when you shoot them that, or should have known that you probably could kill them, right? But then there's like recklessness in the mindset. Reckless. Things are reckless. I'm driving 130 miles an hour down the highway. I'm out of control, flip the car, goes up on the sidewalk, kills 2 young boys. Okay. Did I come home and did I aim the car at them and drive them over? No, knowing or should have known. No, it's reckless. I wasn't out to kill the boys, but the car rolled and it killed them. Still a crime, still punishable, still got to go to jail, but that's the difference between premeditation and the other and second-degree murder. And then there's negligence, even less, still punishable. So what do we use to determine a totality of the circumstances? Well, video, witnesses, interviews, backgrounds, everything. And then we put it to a jury of our peers to decide based on the laws that we've all agreed upon. Let's say Derek Chauvin was a KKK member who had a manifesto and a diary and attended meetings. He's not, I'm making this up, but I'm making this up. I'm not saying he is, all right? And he wrote in his journal, I'm going to kill anybody that's not a blonde-haired white guy as much as I can. I want to hurt them and kill them while I'm on the job of police officer. I mean, that's the worst. That's like the premeditated. That's the worst thing I could think of, right? That's one scenario. If that's found to be the case, punishment. Bam! Hard one. Biggest one. Let's say Derek Chauvin is an abusive cop. Just a jerk. Likes to just hurt people. Doesn't really care. They're white, black, brown, whatever. He's just, I'm the police, you're not. I'm going to hurt you when I can. And still punishable. I'm kneeling on your neck because I'm hurting you. Now, we have to look at everything together. I don't have all the facts yet, but was that like reckless that turned into, they originally charged him with third-degree murder, right? So that's the manslaughter type thing. Was that the recklessness? Or did he know or should have known? I'm not using the exact verbiage from every statute here. I'm just, we're just talking about ideas here. So I'm not saying those are the words of the statute, but was it higher than reckless? So should he have known? I'm kneeling on your neck. This could kill you. They upped it to second-degree murder, so they seem to think so. We have to look at all of it. The body cams. We have to interview Derek Chauvin, the other cops, all the witnesses, all the other cams. We have to look at the history of the cop. Now, every cop's going to have complaints, but you're looking for patterns of misconduct. Is there patterns of discourtesy or racial bias, abuse of force, abuse of power? Because every good working cop gets complained on, but is there a pattern? That's the kind of thing. It's going to be a deep and should be a deep thing that we're looking at to figure out culpability. All right, that's the justice system. That's what it's seeking to do. Now let's talk about reform. Is reform needed? There was a comic one time that I cut out when I was in college, and there was a politician standing at a podium, and it said, boy falls from 47-story building, and the politician says, that's it, we're banning 47-story buildings. So I'm not saying reform isn't needed here. What I'm saying is sometimes the system, the rules, the policies are in place to defend against such a thing, and just sometimes in every walk of life, bad stuff happens, bad people get through the cracks, and you can't possibly make a system where nothing bad ever happens. So is this a situation that requires law enforcement reform? I don't know. Let's have that discussion. Remember the ex-Dallas cop, Amber Geiger? Last year, she was convicted of murder. She shot an unarmed black man while she was going home. I believe she was in uniform. She walked into an apartment she thought was her own in the complex where she lived. I don't know how you do that, okay? And the poor guy's sitting there just eating ice cream or something, and she ends up getting in a confrontation with him and shooting and killing him. Did you see her testimony by chance? Did you see what she said? Did you see how destroyed she was? I wonder if we showed that to all of America. You watched her testimony. I'm sure there's a small group of people, but I wonder how many of you would say, yeah, she didn't set out to kill a black guy that day. What she did was horrible. It was a tragedy. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. She should be punished. She should go to jail. You can't do that. I mean, what? Come on. It's terrible. It's a terrible decision making. That's an example of atrocious decision making. And you're guilty of murder and you should go to jail. She did. She did. But is it worthy of police reform? Is the system set up to encourage that kind of behavior? It's not. And was it against policy? And was it against the law? And was justice served? Yes. So now do we make new policies about that? Or do we just say we punish the individual that did it? Is what Derek Chauvin did against the rule of law? I believe so. The system isn't set up for that. Cops aren't kneeling on people's necks. It was certainly against the law. He's been charged with murder, and so have the other cops being charged with aiding and abetting. It's already against the law. They broke the law. So I'm not saying reform isn't necessary, but look, was this, we have to decide this. Is this a reform issue, or is this just a bad guy? Let's just punish him, and the others that were culpable. We have to decide that. But we're not going to decide that if we're just burning everything down and hurting each other and not talking about it. We need to be open. We need to hear the facts. We need to listen to them, and they're not going to come out at first. Law enforcement has to protect the integrity of the court case. That's what law enforcement's primary objective is. So it'll be transparent later. We could probably read the transcript of the entire trial. By that time, nobody's going to care anymore about what happened during the trial. They want to know now. But we have to give people their day in court. Everybody gets their day in court. Right? Okay. You're listening to the Steve Warneke Show on 850 WFTL. It's at stevewarneke.com. Well, this is a 4-part series on policing in America. You're listening to part 1, The Broad Brush. All right, so we have the George Floyd case. We have a wrong that occurred. Protests begin. Protesters. What are protesters? They were peaceful. They were people that said, this is wrong. We want to do something about this. We want accountability. We want change. We might need reform. We want something done, especially because they weren't arrested for 3 days or whatever it was. Great. That's what America was built on. Protests, peaceful. And most of the protesters were peaceful. And then there's the anarchists. And the anarchists are intent on overthrowing the rule of law and the entire government, frankly. Okay? Now listen, they've been around a long time. I was in Denver back when the Broncos won the Super Bowl. I wasn't a cop yet the first time. Went downtown. Everybody's cheering, high-fiving strangers, woo, partying, celebrating. Yeah, the Broncos won. This is like a community come-together thing where we can join hands and like become close as a community and celebrate this victory we've been waiting for so long. And then here come the anarchists. lighting things on fire, breaking windows, throwing bottles at cops, throwing things, overturning cars. That was them. Those weren't Bronco fans. Then I was a cop during the Stanley Cup finals when the Avalanche won. And I was there too. Same thing. Here the anarchists come. I was down during the Occupy movement downtown Denver. Occupy movement was people protest, or was peaceful, people protesting. Here come the anarchists. I was at the Democratic National Convention. People were protesting peacefully. Here come the anarchists. They got bottles of urine. They're throwing rocks, Molotov cocktails. They've got devices. They're intent on hurting people. They want to steal, break windows, burn, loot, cause havoc, cause chaos. Any chance they get. This is what anarchists do. Very few protesters are anarchists, and very few anarchists are the protests. They're not mutually exclusive. Perhaps there's some overlap, but I would suggest it's probably very, very low. I remember getting hit with rocks, bottles, spit on, called names, getting taunted. Those weren't the protesters. Those were the anarchists. I've had all that happen. It's terrible. Put yourself in the situation just for a moment. Those aren't protesters. Those are anarchists, and they want to hurt you. And now we have this destruction across America. Who knows what the total damage amount is going to be? Who's paying for this? We are. We're going to pay for it. It's $55 million in damage alone in Minneapolis. How much across the country? For what? Burn down our own communities? Burn down the places where we live and shop and play and eat and drink? Citizens hurt. Cops hurt. Lots of cops hurt. Is that what we want? Is that how we're going to pay them back? Let's hurt the cops. Let's hurt the cops that weren't even involved with this. Albany, New York, cops hurt. Asbury Park, New Jersey, struck by an ATV. Brockton, Mass. Buffalo, New York, trooper run over. Champaign, Illinois. Columbia, South Carolina. 15 law enforcement officers are hurt. Cincinnati, Ohio. Chicago had 132 of its cops injured during the riots. 132 injured. Davenport police hit by gunfire. He was in an unmarked car. Denver, 3 cops hit and run. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, cops hurt. Las Vegas, cops shot in the back of the head on life support. Los Angeles, 27 cops hurt. Lynchburg, Virginia, cops hurt. Minnesota, police station burned. Cops shot at. Maryland. New York City, police hurt. One was stabbed in the neck. 2 others suffered gunshot wounds from an unprovoked night attack. Oak Lawn, Illinois. Oakland, California. Had a federal officer killed. Dave Patrick Underwood, 53, was providing security at U.S. courthouse, shot and killed. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Richmond, Virginia, Rhode Island, Sacramento, California, Salt Lake City, Utah, San Antonio, San Jose, California. Secret Service, 50 agents injured. St. Louis, Missouri, retired captain, 77-year-old African-American man, shot dead. Washington, D.C., Wichita, Kansas. Is that what's solving everything? Is that what so we've solved it? That made it better. See, that's not the protesters. George Floyd's own family is saying, don't be violent. We know you don't answer violence with violence. The anarchists have us right where they want us. You know why? To complicate this situation, the police officers, the one everybody's pissed at, right? They're the ones responsible, still, now, even after this incident, they're the ones tasked with restoring order and keeping peace. And an even more paradoxical twist of fate, they often have to use force in order to do that. And the anarchists have us right where they want. The cops don't want to use force. That's what everybody's mad about. But how do you get everybody safe again if you can't use force when you have anarchists burning everything, hurting people, looting and stealing. So police leaders and city leaders are afraid. They're going, oh, well, okay, let's go hands off a little bit. Let's just babysit them. We don't want to use too much use of force. It's going to be seen as police brutality. You know, every time police do use force since this George Floyd protest and riot, the media reports it. People talk about it as if the force is being used against the protesters. It's not the protesters. It's the anarchists. They're not there to support law enforcement reform. They're there to destroy our rule of law. America was not founded on hurting each other. I don't believe that's how most of the protesters want to do it. Looting and stealing when we want to affect change, that's not America. And the media and America, including Hollywood stars, by the way, who are pooling their money together to bail these people out. You're not bailing out peaceful protesters, guys. You're bailing out people that have lit people's cars on fire, broken windows, smashed people over the head with bricks, hurt cops. That's who you're bailing out. What are you doing? The anarchists are loving this. We've had teachers in the past get in trouble for assaulting kids or having sex with them or whatever, right? Do we burn schools down? Burn towns down? All across the country, do we go to schools and start injuring other teachers? No. We know teachers are good people. There's the bad apple now and then. And when a doctor screws up, when there's a malpractice, somebody dies at the hands of a doctor, do we go burn the hospital down? Do we start shooting in the back of the head random doctors all around the country? No. That's not even a thing. Everybody's like, what are you talking about right now, right? Because we don't do stuff like that. So why do we do it with police? The existing system of policing, which we're going to talk about next week, is misunderstood. It needs improvement. It needs adaptation. I'm not saying it's perfect, but you can't let perfect be the enemy of a good system. The law enforcement system is more transparent than you think. It has tons of oversight. It has accountability out the wazoo. We're going to talk about that in part 3. You're listening to the Steve Warneke Show on 850 WFTL. This is a 4-part series on policing in America. It's at stevewarneke.com. You're listening to episode 1, The Broad Brush. So let's continue with our global perspective. Let's look at police work in general. How prevalent is misconduct? We hear about it a lot in the news. We hear about big stories. They're not every day. They're not every week. Seems like it's happening all the time because when it bleeds, it leads, and that's what we hear about. But law enforcement is contacting and having contact 375 million times per year with people. You know, in my book, From Boy to Blue, I did research about my department. I found that 1 million calls came into the communications center in a year, and on average that the Internal Affairs Bureau fields between 300 and 500 cases per year, many of which turn out to be bogus because I worked there. I mean, just completely baseless, but some of them don't. Some of them are legit. But even if we counted every one of those 500 cases, that still means that out of the calls and interactions that came in, it's 0.0005% of what police did there is coming up as a matter of concern. And I can tell you, after working in internal affairs, the climate in internal affairs when I was there was to hold people accountable. They were charged criminally. We would wait. They were looked at civilly for lawsuits. They were looked at departmentally, sometimes all three. There was a civilian monitor office that was brought to the city where I worked after a controversial police shooting, and the civilian monitor's office oversees all of internal affairs cases, has access to all of their information, puts out a report every year. Transparency, it's there. It's there. They're the ones making sure that there is accountability there. Now listen, I'm just telling you I worked in internal affairs, and that was the climate. I can't speak for every police department, but I'm telling you that's it. Bad cops eventually get fired. They do. I've known a few over the years. I mean, even some big cases that I've known about. Cops involved with drugs, cops involved with drugs and prostitution. Yeah, it happens. Even at my department, that happens. Not very often. I mean, rarely. Not even, but it happens. A mentor of mine once told me, you know the person you want as a police officer? You know the ultimate test for who you want as a police officer? And it's the person you want standing in your grandmother's house at 2 a.m. when she heard somebody downstairs and calls the police. That's who you want as the cops. I heard that before I ever started, and that's the guy I wanted to be. I took pride in being the guy that showed up at your grandmother's house when somebody was downstairs trying to hurt her. That's the job I wanted. There are people that does not apply to on the police force. And some of them are jerks. And in my experience, most of the time, they either are not on the street or they get fired. Or they leave. So, it's not a perfect system, but that's been my experience. All right? Now, across the nation, police shot and killed 1,004 people last year in America. Most of whom were armed and dangerous, by the way. African Americans made up 1/4 of those killed by police, 235. Who are our police officers? Do you know any of them? Is Derek Chauvin and his cocky grin kneeling on a poor man's neck for 9 minutes, is that the new face of law enforcement? Does that represent police officers? Is that who every police officer is? Do you know a police officer? Have you met a nice police officer? Are a lot of these police officers fathers, brothers, husbands, friends, neighbors? Are they good people? Or are all is all anybody seeing Derek Chauvin's face when they look at the badge? Hugh Jackman was criticized for sharing a photo of an African-American protester hugging a white police officer. I mean, wasn't Hugh just trying to say, that's not the face of law enforcement? This is. Or that's not the only face of law enforcement. This is. And he was criticized for it? Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative we're trying to force? Is it possible that bad cops are the exception? Is that possible to you? They certainly have been in my experience. I've seen some really bad cops, even at my own department, get charged criminally, get fired, go to jail. I've seen some. It happens. It happens. Probably always will. We try to reduce the number of times it happens. Better hiring practices, better oversight, whatever we're trying, but it happens. Is it possible in your mind that despite America's claim that most police are racist, that's not true? That most police are pretty good people? Is that possible in your mind? We're going to talk about the face of America's law enforcement officers in episode 2 next week. If you listen carefully, though, pay attention to what's on your Facebook and your Twitter. Pay attention to what your neighbors, your friends, your family, your coworkers are saying. What are you really seeing? What are you seeing? Take an inventory, because I see people hugging, crying, trying to unite, trying to walk with people who feel scared, praying together. I see exhausted cops broken down in tears, up against police cars, bleeding. I see a line of police and National Guard kneeling in prayer before a line of protesters. That's what I saw. Does that look like Derek Chauvin to you? Here's what's interesting about the Derek Chauvin case. There's lots of arguments about a ton of past high-profile police shootings. This one There is a mass unified condemnation of what has happened by citizens and police, with very few exceptions. There's a couple people here and there like, we didn't do nothing wrong, cops and citizens, but for the most part, think about it. Cops everywhere. I'm reading my Facebook, and of course I'm friends with all these cops coming out in the beginning. Cops are usually the first to say, let's have an investigation, let's hear all the facts. Coming out in the beginning and saying, nope, that was totally wrong. There has been an agreement, if you think about it. A massive majority of people and cops agreeing that this is wrong and that justice shall be served. And cops trying to tell you for the first time, we're hearing them speak out a lot. That's not us. That's not us. He's not us. I'll ask you another question. Isn't it possible for you to support race reform and the police? Are those two things diametrically opposed? So if you're for the police, you're against unification? You're against trying to end racism? And if you want to end racism, then you can't be a supporter of the police? I don't even know how that is passing the smell test. Absolutely, you can do both. Why are we being told that we can't? I want you to think for a moment about the technique used by actual racists. Okay? What do? What do racist people do? They paint everybody with a broad brush. They assume the actions of some are representative of a group as a whole. They take their prejudices, their prejudgings, what they've been taught or heard or seen, and they apply it to an entire group of people. And we have been taught since the very first days I can remember not to do that. And we've come a long way in race relations in this country, thank God. And we still have work to go. But isn't that what we're doing to the police right now? Aren't we using the same technique? Aren't we using a broad brush against an entire group of people based on the actions of a few? I think we are. And I don't think it's right. It didn't work in race relations, and it's not going to work in police relations. So, who are America's police officers? Next week on the Steve Warneke Show, here on 850 WFTL, I want to talk to you about who are the cops. What kind of people are the police? Who are America's law enforcement officers? Then in week 3, we'll look at the policing system. I want to talk to you about the existing system, use of force, oversight, what it looks like currently, transparency, where you can find stuff, the rule of law. It's going to be a great discussion. And then the last week, we'll talk about PTSD, cumulative trauma, or what I call law enforcement distress syndrome, and how the job of police is creating a divide. The actual job, how the job, not anybody's fault, the job of police is help creating a divide between America. Tune in next week, 850 WFTL. I am Steve Warneke. You're listening to the first of a 4-part series on policing in America. You've just heard The Broad Brush. I am over at stevewarneke.com. That's Steve Warneke, WARNEKE.com. There's tons of information there and ways to contact me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for being open. Thank you so much for taking part in this very important discussion. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week, next Saturday at 10 for part 2 of Policing in America on the Steve Warneke Show. Have a great week. Be safe. God bless.